Have you ever stood at the absolute edge of giving up, when the weight of the world felt so heavy that even breathing seemed like too much effort? Only to discover that salvation can come from the most unexpected places, sometimes with four legs, a wagging tail, and a heart full of unconditional love? Well, hello there, my dear friends. Come on over and settle into that favorite chair of yours, you know, the one where the cushions have molded perfectly to your body over the years, where the morning light hits just right, where you've shared countless cups of coffee and quiet moments of reflection. I'm Joe, and though some folks around these parts have come to know me as Grandpa Joe, today I want to share something with you that I've never spoken about publicly before. Something so personal and profound that it took me 40 years to fully understand its meaning. Today, I want to tell you about the night that changed everything, the night when I was 25 years old, drowning in a sea of debt and failed relationships, sitting alone on a bridge at 3 in the morning, seriously contemplating whether the world would be better off without me in it. But more importantly, I want to tell you about what happened next, about a four-legged angel who appeared out of nowhere and reminded me that sometimes the most powerful interventions come not from grand gestures or profound words, but from simple, pure love that asks for nothing in return. If these conversations we share bring you comfort during the quiet hours, perhaps remind you that you're not alone in whatever struggles you might be facing, or simply provide the reassurance that life's darkest moments can transform into its most meaningful lessons, I would be deeply honored if you'd consider joining our little community here by subscribing. It helps me reach other souls who might need to hear that no matter how dark the night gets, dawn always comes. And it tells me that these stories of survival and transformation have genuine value in your life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to a time that feels both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. To the spring of 1980, when I was a young man who thought he had all the answers, but was discovering he'd been asking all the wrong questions. Picture, if you will, a 25-year-old version of myself, cocky, ambitious, absolutely certain that success was just around the corner, convinced that I could take on the world and win. I'd graduated from college 3 years earlier with a business degree and dreams bigger than the Texas sky. Dreams of building an empire, of making my mark on the world, of proving to everyone, especially my father, who'd always looked at me with that particular expression of disappointed skepticism, that I was destined for greatness. I'd started what I was convinced would be a revolutionary lawn care business, not just mowing grass like every other college kid with a pickup truck, but offering complete landscape design and maintenance services I'd borrowed against everything: my car, my furniture, even my grandmother's wedding ring, which she'd given me with the instruction to use it when you really need it. I'd convinced 3 of my college friends to invest their savings, promising returns that seemed not just possible but inevitable. For the first 6 months, everything looked golden. We had contracts with several upscale neighborhoods. Our designs were getting attention, and I was already planning our expansion into commercial properties. I walked with the swagger of someone who'd figured out the secret to success, who'd cracked the code that eluded so many others. I bought expensive suits I couldn't afford, drove a car that stretched my budget to the breaking point, and carried myself like a man who owned the world. But you know how life has a way of teaching us humility when we think we're too smart to learn it any other way. The first sign of trouble came in early spring, when 3 of our biggest clients decided not to renew their contracts. One complained about our pricing, another said our crews weren't reliable enough, and the third simply chose to go with a larger, more established company. And within 2 weeks, we'd lost 60% of our revenue. But I convinced myself it was just a temporary setback, that we'd bounce back stronger than ever. That's when the real cascade began. Without the cash flow from those major contracts, I couldn't make the payments on the equipment loans. The bank that had seemed so friendly when I was expanding suddenly became cold and demanding. Late fees turned into penalty interest rates. Penalty interest rates turned into acceleration clauses. Acceleration clauses turned into repossession notices that arrived in my mailbox like death certificates for my dreams. But it wasn't just the business falling apart. It was everything, all at once. Like my entire life had been a house of cards and someone had opened all the windows at the same time. My girlfriend of 2 years, Sarah, who'd stood by me through the early struggles and celebrated with me during the brief success, finally reached her breaking point when I had to ask her to cover our rent for the third month in a row. I can still see her face that evening when I came home and found her suitcases by the door, packed and ready. Her eyes red from crying, but her jaw set with a determination I'd never seen before. "I can't do this anymore, Joe," she said, and her voice carried a weariness that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. "I've watched you become someone I don't recognize. You're angry all the time, stressed all the time, and you've stopped seeing anything good in the world. I've tried to be supportive, but I feel like I'm drowning with you, and I can't save both of us." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was giving up just when things were about to turn around, to convince her to stay and fight with me. But even as the words formed in my mouth, I realized I didn't believe them myself. I couldn't promise her things would get better because I was no longer sure they would. I couldn't ask her to have faith in me when my own faith was hanging by the thinnest of threads. So I watched her walk out of my life, taking with her not just her love and companionship, but also my last connection to the person I thought I was, the person I thought I could become. The friends who'd invested in the business stopped returning my calls. The confidence that had carried me through my early 20s evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. The future that had seemed so bright and certain just months before now looked like an endless tunnel with no light visible anywhere. Within 6 months, I'd lost everything: the business, the girl, the friends, the confidence, the sense of purpose that had driven me since high school. I was living in a one-room apartment that smelled of old cigarettes and defeated dreams, working nights at a warehouse loading trucks for barely above minimum wage, watching the dawn break through dirty windows while other people started their days with hope and direction. But even that wasn't the bottom. The real bottom came when I realized that all the debt I'd accumulated, the business loans, the credit cards I'd maxed out trying to keep things afloat, the personal loans from friends and family, wasn't going to disappear just because the business had failed. Every morning brought new collection notices, new threats, new reminders that my failures were going to follow me for years, possibly decades. I'd wake up in that cramped apartment with my stomach already twisted in knots, dreading the sound of the phone, the arrival of the mail, the knock on the door that might be a process server or a repo man. I'd lie in bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, doing the math over and over again, trying to find some combination of income and expenses that would allow me to climb out of the hole I dug for myself. The numbers never worked. No matter how I calculated it, no matter how optimistic I tried to be about future earning potential, the debt was growing faster than my ability to pay it down. Interest and penalties were accumulating like snow in a blizzard, and I was slowly but surely being buried alive by the consequences of my own ambition and poor judgment. But what haunted me most during those dark months wasn't the money, it was the faces of the people I'd let down. My college friends who'd trusted me with their savings and were now struggling financially because of my failures. My grandmother, whose wedding ring was gone forever, sold to pay for equipment that was now being repossessed anyway. My parents, who'd co-signed on some of the loans and were now facing calls from collection agencies. Their retirement security threatened by their son's spectacular collapse. I'd started every day with good intentions, determined to find a way to make things right, to turn everything around, to prove that this was just a temporary setback rather than a permanent disaster. But as the weeks turned into months, as each small hope was systematically crushed by reality, as the weight of all those disappointed expectations and broken promises grew heavier and heavier, I began to wonder if there was any way forward at all. That's when the really dark thoughts started creeping in. It began with moments of thinking that everyone would be better off if I just disappeared. If I could somehow remove myself from the equation and stop being a burden to all the people who'd believed in me. At first, these were just passing thoughts, fleeting moments of despair that I'd shake off with forced optimism and renewed determination to fight my way back. But despair has a way of wearing down even the strongest resolve, like water slowly eroding stone. Each day brought new evidence that things weren't getting better, that the hole I was in was too deep to climb out of, that the damage I'd done was too extensive to repair. The weight of carrying all that guilt and shame and hopelessness became harder and harder to bear. I stopped calling my family because I couldn't stand to hear the worry in their voices. I stopped looking for new jobs because the prospect of explaining my situation to potential employers felt overwhelming. I stopped making plans for the future because I couldn't envision one that didn't involve decades of struggling just to get back to zero. And slowly, gradually, without even fully realizing it was happening, I began to consider that maybe the world really would be better off without me in it. Now, let me pause here for a moment. My friends, because I know this is heavy territory we're walking through together. If any of you listening are struggling with similar dark thoughts, please know that what I am sharing isn't meant to glorify or romanticize what I went through, but rather to show you that even the darkest nights can lead to the most profound transformations. That sometimes our greatest gifts come wrapped in our most difficult experiences. And the thoughts that were consuming me during those dark months weren't rational or reasonable. They were the product of depression and despair and a mind that had lost the ability to see any possibility beyond the immediate pain. But at the time, they felt logical, almost inevitable, like the only sensible solution to an impossible problem. I'd convinced myself that my death would solve more problems than it would create. The life insurance policy I'd bought during my optimistic phase would pay off most of the debts, relieving my family of that burden. My friends could stop worrying about trying to help someone who seemed incapable of being helped. The world could move on without having to deal with my failures and broken promises. And it's terrifying how persuasive those thoughts can become when you're in the grip of real despair. How they can take on a logic that seems unassailable when you're looking at the world through the distorted lens of depression and hopelessness. And for weeks, I carried these thoughts around like a secret, never speaking them aloud, but feeling them grow stronger and more insistent each day. I'd find myself researching methods online, making mental inventories of what I own that might be valuable enough to leave behind, drafting and redrafting letters that I never intended to send, but that felt like preparation for something inevitable. The scariest part wasn't the thoughts themselves, it was how comfortable I was becoming with them. How they were starting to feel less like intrusive darkness and more like a reasonable plan. A solution that made sense. A way to finally stop disappointing everyone and causing so much pain. And that brings me to the night of May 15th. 1983, a date that's burned into my memory like a brand. The night when all of those dark thoughts finally crystallized into a plan. When I decided I'd had enough of failing and hurting people and being a burden on the world. I'd spent the day receiving more bad news. Another collection notice. Another demand for payment I couldn't make. Another reminder that the hole I was in was getting deeper rather than shallower. I tried calling a potential employer about a job that seemed promising, only to have them run a credit check and decide they couldn't risk hiring someone with my financial troubles. By evening, I felt like I'd reached the end of my ability to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep believing that things would somehow get better. The apartment that had become my refuge now felt like a prison, and I couldn't stand to spend another night staring at the ceiling, counting debts instead of sheep, calculating all the ways I'd failed instead of dreaming about the future. So I got in my car, an old Honda that was probably worth less than I owed on it, and I drove. I didn't have a specific destination in mind at first. I just needed to move, to feel like I was going somewhere, even if I didn't know where. I drove through the city, past all the places where my life had fallen apart, past the office building where I'd first pitched my business plan, past the restaurant where Sarah and I had celebrated our 6-month anniversary, past the bank that had seemed so eager to lend me money just 2 years before. Eventually, without consciously deciding to go there. I found myself heading toward the old bridge on the outskirts of town, a massive concrete structure that spanned the river valley, connecting our city to the rural areas beyond. And it was a bridge I'd driven across hundreds of times over the years, usually without giving it much thought. But that night, it called to me like a siren song, offering what seemed like the only solution to problems that had become too big to solve. I parked in the small lot near the bridge approach, surprised to find it completely empty at nearly 3 in the morning. The city slept peacefully below, its lights twinkling like earthbound stars, beautiful and serene and utterly indifferent to the drama playing out in my mind. A light rain had started to fall, creating halos around the streetlights and making everything look soft and dreamlike. I walked out onto the bridge slowly, my footsteps echoing off the concrete in a rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. The river flowed far below, dark and mysterious in the dim light, offering what looked like peaceful oblivion after months of chaotic pain. I'd never felt so alone in my life, so completely isolated from every other human being on the planet, so certain that my story was meant to end here, on this bridge, in this moment. I stood at the railing for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, looking down at the water and trying to work up the courage to do what I'd come there to do. And the rain grew heavier, soaking through my jacket and making me shiver. But I barely noticed the physical discomfort, and all my attention was focused on the strange sense of peace that was settling over me, the relief that came from finally having a plan, a way to stop the endless cycle of disappointment and pain. I was just starting to climb over the railing when I heard it, the sound of paws on wet pavement, growing closer and closer, accompanied by the jingling of dog tags and the kind of excited panting that comes from a dog who's just discovered something interesting. I turned around, expecting to see an owner somewhere nearby, but there was no one, just a medium-sized dog with golden fur darkened by the rain, tail wagging furiously, eyes bright with the kind of uncomplicated joy that only dogs seem capable of maintaining regardless of circumstances. Oh, the boss ran straight up to me, completely ignoring the fact that I was a stranger in the middle of the night on a deserted bridge, and began dancing around my feet with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a long-lost friend. Its tail was wagging so hard its entire body was wiggling, and it kept jumping up to put its front paws on my legs, trying to get my attention as if it had something urgent and wonderful to share. "Hey there, buddy," I said, automatically reaching down to pet the dog despite everything that had been going through my mind just moments before. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" The dog responded to my voice by getting even more excited, spinning in a little circle and then sitting directly in front of me, looking up with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to something good in me that I'd forgotten existed. Its tongue was hanging out in what looked like a grin, and despite the late hour and the rain and the fact that we were complete strangers, it seemed absolutely delighted to have found me. "Where's your owner?" I asked, looking around again for any sign of another person. But we were completely alone on the bridge, just me and this exuberant, rain-soaked yacht who acted like I was the best thing that had happened to it all day. That's when I noticed the collar and tags. The dog wasn't lost. It was obviously well cared for, with a sturdy collar and current registration tags that jingled softly as it moved. But there was no leash, no sign of an owner anywhere nearby. It was as if this dog had appeared out of nowhere at exactly the moment when I needed it most. Like some kind of four-legged guardian angel sent to intervene at the crucial moment. I knelt down to get a better look at the tags, and the dog immediately took advantage of my proximity to shower my face with kisses, its wet nose cold against my cheek. Its enthusiasm so pure and uncomplicated that I found myself laughing for the first time in months. And there was something absolutely magical about being the focus of such unbridled affection, such complete acceptance, especially when I felt like the most unlovable person in the world. The name tag read Lucky, which seemed almost too perfect to be coincidental. He belonged to someone named Janet Morrison, with an address about 2 miles from the bridge. and there was a phone number. And without really thinking about why I was doing it, I decided that the responsible thing to do would be to call and let Lucky's owner know where their dog was. I found a payphone near the parking area. This was 1983, remember? Long before cell phones made communication instant and universal, and dialed the number with fingers that were shaking from cold and adrenaline and emotions I couldn't quite name. Lucky stayed right beside me, occasionally looking up with those warm eyes as if to make sure I wasn't going anywhere without him. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, groggy but alert in the way of someone who's used to middle-of-the-night calls. "Hello? Hi, I'm sorry to wake you," I said, suddenly feeling awkward about the whole situation. "I'm calling about your dog, Lucky. Found him on the bridge downtown, and I wanted to let you know he's safe." There was a pause, and then the woman's voice changed completely, becoming warm and worried and grateful all at once. "Oh my goodness. Lucky got out again? I'm so sorry. He's an escape artist. I can't believe he made it all the way to the bridge." "Is he okay? Are you okay? It's so late. What were you doing out there?" That last question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to explore. How do you explain to a stranger that you were standing on a bridge at 3 in the morning seriously considering ending your life, and that their dog might have just saved you from making the biggest mistake you could ever make? I couldn't sleep," I said finally, which was true enough. "I was just driving around and I saw him on the bridge. He seems fine, very friendly." "That's lucky for you," Janet said, and I could hear the affection in her voice even through the phone line in the distance. "He thinks everyone in the world is his best friend. I can come get him right now if you can stay with him for a few more minutes." I hate to ask, but he's not just a pet by him. He's trained as a therapy dog, and he works with people who are going through difficult times by him. I can't bear the thought of him being out there alone. A therapy dog. Of course, the universe's sense of humor was apparently as profound as its sense of timing. "I'll wait with him," I said, and as I spoke the words, I realized I meant them in ways that went far deeper than just keeping an eye on a lost dog. "We'll be right here." Janet arrived 15 minutes later, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes who hurried toward us with the urgency of someone retrieving a beloved family member. Lucky's greeting was enthusiastic but brief. He was clearly happy to see his owner, but he kept looking back at me as if he wasn't quite finished with whatever he'd come to do. "Mom, I can't thank you enough for calling," Janet said, clipping a leash onto Lucky's collar. "He's never wandered this far before. I have no idea how he managed to get out of the yard, let alone make it all the way downtown." She paused then, looking at me more carefully in the dim light from the bridge's security lamps, and I saw something shift in her expression. A recognition, perhaps, or an intuition honed by years of working with people in crisis. "Are you sure you're all right?" she asked gently. "It's a strange night to be out driving around, and you look like someone who's carrying a heavy load." Oh, there was something about her voice, something about the way she asked the question without judgment or prying curiosity that made me want to tell her everything. But maybe it was the emotional exhaustion of the past months, or the adrenaline crash from what had almost happened while on the bridge, or the strange intimacy that comes from sharing an unexpected moment with strangers in the middle of the night. "I've been going through a rough patch," I said, which was such a massive understatement that it almost made me laugh. Tonight felt like it might be the end of the road. Janet nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant, as if she'd heard similar words from other people in other dark moments. "Lucky has a gift for finding people who need him most," she said quietly. "He's helped a lot of folks get through some very dark nights. I don't think it was an accident that he found you tonight." We stood there for a moment in the rain, 3 beings connected by circumstances that defied explanation. A woman who devoted her life to helping others heal. a dog trained to provide comfort to people in crisis, and a young man who'd come to a bridge planning to end his story but was now beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over after all. "Would you like to get some coffee?" Janet asked suddenly. "I know a 24-hour diner about 10 minutes from here." Lucky loves car rides. And honestly, after the scare of finding him missing, I'm too wired to go back to sleep anyway. I should have said no. I should have thanked her for coming to get Lucky, wished them well, and gone back to my apartment to process what had just happened. Instead, I heard myself saying yes, following her car to an all-night diner that glowed like a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness, sitting across from her in a red vinyl booth while Lucky curled up at our feet and the smell of coffee and bacon began to work its own kind of magic. "So," Janet said once we'd ordered, "coffee for both of us, scrambled eggs and toast for me because she insisted I looked like I needed to eat something. Do you want to tell me what brought you to that bridge tonight?" And somehow, in that fluorescent lit diner with the gentle weight of Lucky's head resting on my foot and the patient kindness of a stranger who seemed to have all the time in the world to listen, I found myself telling the whole story, and the failed business, the mounting debts, the lost relationships, the crushing sense of having disappointed everyone who'd ever believed in me, the gradual slide into despair that had led to the bridge, to the railing, to a plan that now seemed like it belonged to someone else entirely. Bush Janet listened without interrupting, without offering advice or judgment, just witnessing my pain with the kind of presence that felt like a gift. Lucky seemed to sense the emotional weight of the conversation, occasionally shifting to put his head on my knee or nudging my hand with his nose, as if to remind me that I wasn't alone, that someone, even if that someone had 4 legs and a tail, thought I was worth caring about. "Debt is temporary," Janet said when I'd finished talking, her voice gentle but firm. "Heartbreak is temporary. Even the deepest depression is temporary, though I know it doesn't feel that way when you're in the middle of it. But death is permanent, oh. And from what you've told me tonight, I think you have a lot more living to do." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Janet Morrison, licensed clinical social worker, specializing in crisis intervention and therapy. Below her name was the same phone number I'd called from the bridge. "This is what I do," she said. Sliding the card across the table, "I help people who are going through the kind of crisis you're experiencing. We're a team. He has an instinct for finding people who need help, and I have the training to provide it. What happened tonight wasn't a coincidence. It was an intervention." I stared at the card, turning it over in my hands as if it held secrets I couldn't quite decipher. "I can't afford therapy," I said, the practical concerns that had dominated my thoughts for months automatically surfacing. "I can barely afford this coffee." Janet smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to come from deep experience with human nature and its capacity for both despair and resilience. "I work with a community mental health center that provides services on a sliding scale," she said. "Cost is never a barrier to getting help if you really want it. The question isn't whether you can afford therapy, it's whether you can afford not to get it." She paused, reaching down to scratch Lucky behind the ears. "Myers," she continued, "Lucky seems to have adopted you, and he's a pretty good judge of character. He doesn't waste his time on people who aren't worth saving." We talked until dawn, sitting in that diner as the world slowly awakened around us. Janet told me about her work with the crisis center, about the people she'd helped navigate through their darkest moments, about the remarkable resilience of the human spirit when given the right support and encouragement. Lucky dozed at our feet, occasionally opening one eye to check on us, like a furry guardian angel making sure his intervention was taking hold. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed impossibly beautiful after the darkness of the night, I realized something had shifted inside me. Not everything, I still had all the same problems I'd had when I walked onto that bridge. All the same debts and disappointments and challenges, but something fundamental had changed in how I was seeing those problems, in my sense of whether they were solvable, in my belief that I might be worth the effort it would take to solve them. "What happens now?" I asked as we prepared to leave the diner. The question carrying more weight than just the immediate logistics of getting home. "Now you go home and get some sleep," Janet said practically. "Then you call me this afternoon, and we set up an appointment to start working on getting your life back on track. And Lucky and I will be there to help you every step of the way." She paused at the door of the diner, looking back at me with an expression that was part compassion, part determination, and part something I couldn't quite identify. "Joe," she said, using my name for the first time that night, "what happened tonight on that bridge? That wasn't the end of your story. That was the beginning of a new chapter. A better chapter. But only if you're willing to write it." I drove home as the city came alive around me, watching people begin their days with purpose and energy that I envied, but was beginning to think I might someday feel again. The problems that had seemed insurmountable just hours before were still there, still real, still requiring solutions. But they no longer felt like they defined my worth as a human being, no longer seemed like evidence that the world would be better off without me. And that afternoon, I called Janet and made an appointment for the following week. It was the first positive step I'd taken in months. The first time I'd reached out for help instead of trying to handle everything alone. The first acknowledgement that maybe I didn't have to carry all this weight by myself. The therapy process wasn't easy or quick, and over the following months, Janet and I worked together to untangle the depression that had made everything seem hopeless, to develop practical strategies for managing the debt and rebuilding my life, to understand the patterns of thinking that had led me to that bridge in the first place. What Lucky was often part of our sessions, providing a kind of emotional support that no human therapist could replicate. And there's something about the presence of a dopamine, their complete acceptance, their obvious pleasure in your company, their ability to live fully in the present moment that makes healing feel more possible, more natural, more like a return to something essential rather than a struggle towards something artificial. Slowly, gradually, with the kind of patience that I'd never shown myself before, I began to rebuild. Not the grandiose empire I dreamed of in my early 20s, but something more sustainable, more realistic, more aligned with who I actually was rather than who I thought I should be. I found work with a landscaping company, not as the owner, not as the visionary, but as a crew member who showed up every day and did honest work for honest pay. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was back in the lawn care business, but this time without the crushing pressure of having to make it into something bigger than it needed to be. The debt took years to pay off, but with Janet's help, I negotiated payment plans that were manageable, that allowed me to make progress without sacrificing basic necessities like food and shelter. And some of the people I'd borrowed from were understanding and forgiving. The others weren't. But all of them eventually were paid back in full, along with interest and, in some cases, heartfelt apologies for the stress and disappointment I'd caused. The hardest part was learning to forgive myself, to accept that failure didn't make me a failure, that making mistakes didn't make me a mistake. That lesson took longer to absorb than any of the practical steps toward financial recovery, and in many ways, it's a lesson I'm still learning 40 years later. But here's what I want you to understand. My dear friends, as we sit together in the warmth of this story that began in such darkness, that night on the bridge, that moment when Lucky came bounding out of the rain with his tail wagging and his heart full of unconditional love, that wasn't just a story about a dog saving a man from suicide. It was a story about recognizing that we're never as alone as we think we are, that help comes in forms we don't expect, that the universe has a way of providing exactly what we need, exactly when we need it most. Over the years that followed, as I slowly rebuilt my life and my sense of purpose, I stayed in touch with Janet and Lucky, and they became not just the people who saved my life, but genuine friends who continued to enrich it in countless ways. I volunteered at the crisis center, helping other people navigate through their own dark nights. I learned that my experience of hitting bottom and climbing back up had given me a kind of credibility and empathy that could be incredibly valuable to someone else standing where I had stood. Janet eventually retired, but Lucky continued working as a therapy dog well into his golden years, bringing comfort and hope to hundreds of people over the course of his remarkable life. He lived to be 15 years old in our home, which is a good long life for a dog of his size. And when he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, the memorial service was attended by more than 100 people whose lives he had touched. I was one of the speakers at that service. And I stood in front of all those people, many of whom had their own stories of dark nights and unexpected interventions. And I talked about how Lucky had taught me that love doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic music. And sometimes it shows up as a wet nose and a wagging tail and the simple, revolutionary message that someone in the world is genuinely happy to see you, even when you're not particularly happy to see yourself. But Lucky's gift wasn't just about that one night on the bridge, profound as that moment was. His gift was teaching me about the power of presence, about showing up consistently and without judgment, about offering love that doesn't depend on performance or achievement or being anything other than exactly who you are. That lesson has shaped every relationship I've had since then. Every interaction with friends and family and strangers who might be carrying burdens I can't see. When my own children went through difficult times, and they did, because that's what life gives us. Challenges and struggles and moments when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear. I tried to approach them with Lucky's spirit of unconditional acceptance and enthusiastic affection. When my daughter went through her divorce at 32, when she felt like she'd failed at the most important relationship of her life and was questioning everything about her worth and her judgment, I didn't offer advice or solutions or lectures about what she should have done differently. Instead, I showed up with groceries and helped her move furniture and sat with her on the couch while she cried, trying to be the kind of steady, non-judgmental presence that Lucky had been for me on that bridge so many years before. When my son struggled with addiction in his 20s, when he disappeared for months at a time and broke our hearts with his choices in his absence, I held on to the lesson Lucky had taught me about not giving up on someone just because they have given up on themselves. Every time my son was ready to try recovery again, I was there, not with lectures or conditions or demands that he prove himself worthy of love, but with the same kind of uncomplicated acceptance that Lucky had shown me when I was at my lowest point. That doesn't mean I enabled destructive behavior or ignored the need for boundaries and consequences. But it does mean I tried to separate my love for my son from my approval of his choices, to make it clear that no matter how far he fell or how badly he stumbled, there was always his way back, always someone who believed in his capacity to heal and grow and become the person he was meant to be. Both of my children are thriving now, building their own families and careers and contributing to their communities in meaningful ways. I don't take credit for their success. They did the hard work of growing and healing and becoming themselves. But I do think that Lucky's lesson about unconditional love and presence played a role in helping them know they weren't alone in their struggles, that they had a safe place to land when they were ready to try again. As I've gotten older, as I've moved into these years where people my age are supposed to be winding down and stepping back and letting younger generations take the lead, I've found that Lucky's influence has only grown stronger in my life. There's something about reaching your 60s and 70s that can make you feel invisible, like your best days are behind you, like you don't have much left to contribute to a world that seems increasingly focused on youth and innovation and the next big thing. But Lucky taught me that some of the most powerful interventions come not from having all the answers or being the strongest or the smartest or the most accomplished person in the room. Sometimes they come from simply showing up with love and enthusiasm and genuine pleasure in someone else's existence. Sometimes they come from wagging your metaphorical tail when someone needs to know they matter. From offering your presence without asking for anything in return. At 65, I've become something of a lucky myself in my own community. I volunteer at the local senior center, spending time with people who are dealing with loneliness and health challenges, and the particular kind of despair that can come when you feel like your useful life is over. I don't offer therapy or professional counseling. I'm not trained for that, but I offer presence, attention, and the kind of uncomplicated acceptance that says, your life has value. Your story matters. You're not alone. I've sat with people in hospital rooms during long, frightening nights when test results were pending and the future felt uncertain. I've helped neighbors with grocery shopping when mobility issues made simple tasks feel overwhelming. I've listened to countless stories of loss and regret and missed opportunities, offering not solutions but simply the gift of being heard, of having someone witness their pain without trying to fix it or minimize it or rush them toward feeling better. And in all of these interactions, I carry with me the memory of that night on the bridge. The lesson that Lucky taught me about the transformative power of showing up for someone who needs you most. And I may not have 4 legs and a tail, but I can still offer the kind of love that doesn't depend on achievements or appearances or having your life perfectly together. Because here's what I've learned in the 40 years since Lucky found me on that bridge. We're all walking around carrying invisible burdens, fighting battles that others can't see, struggling with challenges that seem insurmountable from the inside, even when they might look manageable from the outside. You never know when the person sitting next to you in church, or standing behind you in line at the grocery store, or living in the house next door might be having their own dark night of the soul, their own moment of standing on a bridge and wondering if the world would be better off without them. But you also never know when your simple presence, your genuine interest in their well-being, your willingness to listen without judgment might be exactly the intervention they need. You don't have to be a professional therapist or a trained crisis counselor to make a difference in someone's life. Sometimes all it takes is being willing to wag your metaphorical tail, to show up with enthusiasm and acceptance, to remind someone that they matter enough for you to stop what you're doing and pay attention to their existence. This is particularly important for those of us in our later years, when it's easy to feel like our time of making a significant impact is past, like we're supposed to step aside and let younger people handle the important work of healing and helping and making the world better. But Lucky was 12 years old when he found me on that bridge, well into his senior years in dog time, and he was still doing the most important work of his life, still capable of interventions that literally saved lives. Goo doesn't diminish our capacity to love well, and if anything, it deepens our understanding of what love really means, what healing really requires, what it takes to help someone find their way back from the edge of despair. We've lived long enough to understand that everyone stumbles, that everyone faces moments when the burden seems too heavy to carry, that everyone needs the kind of grace and acceptance that Lucky offered so freely. The other thing Lucky taught me is about the importance of paying attention to the subtle signs that someone might be struggling. Dogs are notorious for their ability to sense things that humans miss, changes in body language, shifts in energy, the particular kind of stillness that comes from carrying too much pain. Lucky didn't find me on that bridge by accident. He found me because something in his canine wisdom recognized that I was in crisis and needed help. And we can develop that same kind of sensitivity if we're willing to slow down, pay attention, and really see the people around us. The neighbor who used to maintain a perfect yard but has let things slide recently, in the friend who stopped calling and seems to be withdrawing from social activities. It's the family member who's going through the motions of daily life but has lost the spark that used to light them up. And these aren't necessarily signs that someone is contemplating suicide, but they might be indicators that someone is struggling more than they're letting on, that they could benefit from the kind of gentle intervention that Lucky provided for me. Sometimes all it takes is a phone call, a visit, an invitation to coffee, a genuine question about how they're really doing, followed by the patience to listen to an honest answer. In our age of social media and instant communication, we're more connected than ever before, but often less present with each other than we've ever been. We see carefully curated versions of each other's lives. The highlight reels that show only success and happiness and achievement. We forget that behind every perfect Facebook post might be someone struggling with the same kind of challenges that once drove me to a bridge in the middle of the night. And Lucky didn't care about my social media presence or my professional accomplishments or my bank account balance. He cared about the fact that I was hurting and needed someone to show up with love and enthusiasm and absolute acceptance. He reminded me that my worth as a human being had nothing to do with my external circumstances and everything to do with the simple fact that I existed, that I mattered, that the world was better with me in it than without me. This is a lesson that bears repeating, especially for those of us who have lived long enough to accumulate our share of failures and disappointments and regrets. And your value isn't determined by your achievements or your net worth or your perfect track record. Your value comes from the fact that you're here, that you have the capacity to love and be loved, that you have a unique perspective and set of experiences that no one else in the history of the world has ever had or ever will have. The debt that seemed so insurmountable when I was 25 was paid off by the time I was 30. The business that failed so spectacularly became the foundation for a much more successful and sustainable career that followed. The relationship that ended so painfully made room for the love of my life, whom I met 3 years later and have been married to for 37 years now. But more than that, the crisis that almost ended my life became the source of my greatest purpose and deepest understanding of what it means to be human. The night I almost gave up became the night I learned that giving up is never the only option, that help comes in forms we don't expect, that love is always available if we're willing to receive it. And every year on May 15th, I go back to that bridge not to relive the darkness of that night, but to celebrate the transformation that began there. I stand at the same railing where I once contemplated ending my story, and I marvel at all the life that has happened since then, all the love that has been given and received, all the ways that one dog's intervention has rippled out into countless other lives and relationships in moments of healing. Sometimes I bring my grandchildren with me, not to share the full story of what happened there, because they're too young for that kind of darkness, but to talk about the importance of helping others, about being the kind of people who show up when someone needs them most, about recognizing that everyone we meet is fighting battles we can't see and deserves our kindness and compassion. And I tell them about Lucky, about the power of unconditional love, about how sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply be genuinely happy to see them. They love these stories, especially the ones where Lucky saves the day. And I see them starting to understand that heroism doesn't always look like what we see in movies. Sometimes it looks like a dude with a wagging tail and a heart full of love. My youngest granddaughter, Emma, has already decided she wants to train therapy dogs when she grows up, inspired by the stories about Lucky and the difference he made in so many lives. She talks about it with the kind of certainty and enthusiasm that only children possess. And I encourage her dreams while marveling at how Lucky's legacy continues to inspire new generations of helpers and healers. But you don't have to train therapy dogs to carry forward Lucky's message. You just have to be willing to see the people around you, really see them. Not just glance at them as you pass by in the busyness of daily life. You have to be willing to care about their well-being, to check in when something seems off, to offer your presence as a gift rather than as an obligation. Sometimes this means making time for conversations that go deeper than small talk about the weather or complaints about politics. Sometimes it means asking, "How are you really doing?" and then being prepared to listen to an honest answer. Sometimes it means showing up with food when someone is going through a difficult time, or offering practical help with tasks that feel overwhelming, or simply being willing to sit with someone in their pain without trying to fix it or rush them toward feeling better. The world is full of people standing on their own bridges, facing their own dark nights of the soul, wondering if anyone would notice or care if they just disappeared. And some of those bridges are literal, but most of them are metaphorical. The isolation of living alone as you age, the despair that can come with chronic illness, the hopelessness that accompanies financial hardship or family estrangement, or simply the accumulated weight of too many losses and disappointments. But the world is also full of potential luckies, people who have the capacity to offer love and acceptance and hope to those who need it most. People who can wag their metaphorical tails with genuine enthusiasm for others' existence. People who can show up with the kind of presence that reminds struggling souls that they're not alone, that they matter, that their stories aren't over yet. You might be someone's lucky today, this week, this month, that then you might be the intervention that saves a life, that turns a story of despair into a story of hope, that reminds someone of their own worth and potential. And you might never even know it happened, because the most powerful forms of love often work quietly, subtly, in ways that don't announce themselves with fanfare or recognition. But trust me when I tell you that those moments of connection, those instances of genuine care and attention, those simple acts of showing up for someone who needs you, they ripple out in ways you can't imagine. They change not only the life of the person you're helping, but your own life as well, and the lives of everyone those two transformed lives will touch in the years to come. Looking back over the 4 decades since that night on the bridge, I can trace so many of the good things in my life directly back to Lucky's intervention. Not just the obvious things, like the fact that I lived to meet my wife and have children and grandchildren and build a meaningful career, but also the subtler things, the way I've learned to approach other people's struggles with patience and compassion, the way I've been able to help my own children navigate their difficult times, the way I've found purpose and meaning in showing up for others who are facing their own dark nights. Every person I've been able to help over the years, every moment of comfort I have been able to provide, every time I've been someone's lucky, all of that traces back into a dog who appeared out of the rain with his tail wagging and his heart full of love, reminding me that I mattered enough to be saved, and the ripple effects continue even now. The people I've helped have gone on to help others. My children, shaped by growing up in a household that understood the importance of presence and acceptance, have raised their own children with those same values. The story of Lucky gets told and retold, and inspiring new generations of helpers and healers and hope bringers. And this is the real miracle of that night on the bridge. Not just that one life was saved, but that one life saved has become the foundation for countless other acts of love and healing and hope. Lucky's intervention didn't just prevent a tragedy, it created a legacy of transformation that continues to this day. As I wrap up this story, as we come to the end of our time together today, I want to leave you with the most important lesson that Lucky taught me, the one that has guided every day of the 40 years since he found me on that bridge. Love shows up. And sometimes it comes with 4 legs and a wagging tail, and sometimes it comes in the form of a therapist who specializes in crisis intervention. Sometimes it comes as a stranger in a diner who's willing to listen to your story without judgment. But love always shows up. If we're willing to see it, if we're open to receiving it, if we're brave enough to believe that we deserve it, even when we feel undeserving. And once we've received that kind of love, once we've experienced that kind of intervention, we have the opportunity, no, the responsibility to become that same kind of love for others who need it. You don't have to wait for a dramatic crisis to practice being someone's lucky. You can start today with the people right around you, by offering the simple gifts of attention and acceptance and genuine care. You can wag your metaphorical tail with enthusiasm for others' existence, and you can show up with the kind of presence that reminds struggling souls that they're not alone. The world needs more Luckies, more people who understand that love doesn't require perfection or achievement or having your life completely together. Love just requires showing up, being present, and offering the radical acceptance that says, you matter. Your life has value. I'm genuinely glad you exist. At 65, I've learned that some of our greatest purposes in life come not from what we accomplish or accumulate, but from how we love others, how we show up for them in their moments of need, how we remind them of their own worth and potential when they've forgotten it themselves. Unlucky lived to be 15 years old, which means he had 8 years of life after our encounter on that bridge. 8 years to continue being a source of comfort and hope for countless other people facing their own dark nights. 8 years to keep wagging his tail with enthusiasm for every person he met, to keep offering the kind of unconditional love that can literally save lives. When he finally passed away, peacefully in his sleep on a sunny Tuesday morning, Janet called to let me know, and I drove to their house immediately. Not to say goodbye, I'd done that many times over the years, knowing that his time was limited, but to celebrate a life that had been lived with such purpose, such love, such profound impact on everyone who was lucky enough to encounter him. We buried Lucky in Janet's backyard, under a large oak tree, where he'd loved to nap in the shade during his retirement years. And the headstone reads simply, "Lucky Morrison, therapy dog, lifesaver, friend to all." He taught us that love always shows up. At the memorial service, person after person stood up to share their own story of how Lucky had found them during their darkest moments, how his presence had provided comfort and hope when they needed it most. And there were people who'd been grieving the loss of loved ones, people struggling with depression or anxiety, children who'd been traumatized by abuse or neglect, elderly people facing the challenges of aging and illness. Each story was different, but they all contained the same essential element. Lucky had shown up with love and enthusiasm and acceptance, reminding each person that they mattered, that they weren't alone, that healing was possible. He had been, in the truest sense of the word, a living embodiment of grace. Oh, but here's what I realized as I listened to all those stories. Lucky couldn't have saved any of us without Janet. He was the heart and the enthusiasm and the unconditional love. But she was the wisdom and the skill and the follow-through that turned his interventions into lasting transformation. They were a team, each bringing different gifts but working toward the same goal of healing and hope. And that's true for all of us who want to be someone's Lucky. We don't have to have all the answers or all the skills or all the training, but we do need to be willing to work with others, to connect people with the resources and support they need for lasting healing. We need to understand that being someone's initial intervention is just the beginning. The real work of transformation often requires professional help, ongoing support, and time to heal. When I found Lucky on that bridge, he provided the immediate intervention that kept me alive, but Janet provided the therapy and ongoing support that helped me actually rebuild my life. The diner where we talked until dawn provided a safe space for the conversation that started my healing. The crisis center where I eventually volunteered provided the training and resources that helped me help others. And being someone's Lucky means being part of a larger network of care. Understanding that love and healing work best when they are supported by community, resources, and ongoing relationships that provide stability and growth over time. In the years since Lucky's death, I've continued volunteering with the Crisis Center, now serving on their board of directors and helping to train new volunteers. We have several therapy dogs in our program now, all inspired by Lucky's legacy, all trained to provide the same kind of comfort and hope that he offered to so many people over the years. I often tell new volunteers about that night on the bridge, about how Lucky found me when I needed him most, about how his intervention changed not just my life, but created ripple effects that continue to this day. I tell them that they have the same potential to be life-changing interventions for people in crisis, that their willingness to show up with love and acceptance can literally save lives. But I also tell them that being someone's Lucky comes with responsibility. Once you've provided that initial intervention, once you've reminded someone that they matter and that healing is possible, you have an obligation to help connect them with the ongoing support and resources they need for lasting transformation. Love shows up, but love also follows through. As I think about the legacy I want to leave, the impact I want my life to have had when all is said and done, I keep coming back to Lucky's example. He didn't save the world, or cure cancer, or solve global poverty, but he saved lives, one person at a time, one wagging tail at a time, one moment of unconditional love at a time. That's a legacy worth aspiring to, not the grand gestures or the dramatic achievements that get headlines, but the quiet consistency of showing up for people who need us, of offering love and acceptance and hope to those who have forgotten their own worth. of being willing to wag our metaphorical tails with enthusiasm for others' existence, even when our own lives aren't perfect, especially as we age. As we move into these years when the world might tell us our most productive days are behind us, Lucky's example reminds us that some of our most important work might be just beginning. We have accumulated wisdom about pain and healing, about loss and recovery, about the ways that love can transform even the darkest circumstances. We have the time and freedom that younger people often lack, the ability to be present for others without the distractions of building careers or raising young children. We have faced our own dark nights and learned that dawn always comes, that healing is possible, that no story is over until it's over. And these gifts, this wisdom and this availability, this hard-won understanding of resilience and hope, these are exactly what the world needs right now. There are people all around us standing on their own bridges, facing their own moments of despair, wondering if anyone would notice or care if they just disappeared. You could be their lucky. Not by having all the answers or being perfectly way out or having your own life completely figured out, but by showing up with love and enthusiasm and acceptance, by wagging your metaphorical tail with genuine pleasure in their existence, by reminding them that they matter enough for you to stop what you're doing and pay attention to their story. And the world is full of bridges where people stand alone in the dark, convinced that their stories are over, that their lives have no value, that no one would miss them if they were gone. But the world is also full of potential luckies, people like you, like me, like anyone who's willing to love without conditions, to show up without expecting anything in return, to offer hope to those who have lost their way. Sometimes salvation really does come with 4 legs and a wet nose, but sometimes it comes with wrinkled hands and a warm smile and the patient wisdom of someone who's been through their own dark nights and lived to tell about it. Sometimes it comes with the simple willingness to see someone who feels invisible, to care about someone who feels forgotten, to love someone who feels unlovable. That night on the bridge was the worst night of my life and the best night of my life, all rolled into one transformative moment that changed everything. It was the night I almost gave up, but it was also the night I learned that giving up is never the only option, that help comes in forms we don't expect, that love always shows up if we're willing to receive it. I can say with absolute certainty that the world is better because I didn't give up that night, because Lucky found me with his tail wagging and his heart full of love, because Janet was willing to drive across town at 3 in the morning to retrieve a wandering therapy dog and ended up saving a lost young man in the process. But more than that, I can say that my life has been immeasurably enriched by learning to be someone else's lucky, by discovering that some of our greatest purposes come not from what we achieve for ourselves, but from how we show up for others, how we love them through their darkest moments, how we remind them of their own worth and potential when they've forgotten it themselves. As we close our time together today, as you return to your own lives and your own communities and your own opportunities to make a difference, I want you to remember Lucky's simple but profound message. Love shows up, and sometimes when we least expect it, always when we most need it. And once we've received that kind of love, we have the chance to become that same kind of love for others. The bridge where I almost ended my story is still there, still spanning the river valley, still carrying travelers from one side to the other. But now when I see it, I don't think about the darkness that brought me there 40 years ago. I think about the light that found me there, about the wagging tail and wet nose and boundless enthusiasm of a dog who reminded me that I was loved, that I mattered, that my story was far from over. And I think about all the people who might be standing on their own bridges right now, in their own dark nights of the soul, waiting for their own lucky to find them with love and hope and the simple message that they're not alone. You could be that lucky today, tomorrow, this week, this month. You could be the intervention that saves a life, that turns a story of despair into a story of hope, that reminds someone of their own worth and potential. You don't need special training or perfect wisdom or a therapy dog certification. You just need to be willing to show up with love, to wag your metaphorical tail with enthusiasm for others' existence, to offer the kind of presence that reminds struggling souls that they matter, that they're valued, that their stories aren't over yet. The world needs more Luckies. And the world needs people like you who understand that love doesn't require perfection, that hope can be shared even when you're struggling with your own challenges, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is simply be genuinely glad they exist. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today, for allowing me to tell you about the night that changed my life and the dog who saved it. And if this story has touched something in your heart, if it's reminded you of your own capacity to be someone's lucky, I encourage you to act on that inspiration. Look around at the people in your life, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your community, and see if there's someone who might need the gift of your presence, your attention, your love. Remember that every person you meet is fighting battles you can't see, carrying burdens you can't imagine, facing challenges that might feel insurmountable from the inside even when they look manageable from the outside. Remember that your simple presence, your genuine care, your willingness to show up without judgment might be exactly the intervention they need. And remember that being someone's lucky isn't just about helping them. It's about discovering your own purpose, your own meaning, your own capacity for love and hope and transformation. It's about learning that some of our greatest gifts come not from what we accomplish for ourselves, but from how we love others, how we show up for them, how we remind them of their own worth and potential. At 65, I was learned that life's greatest treasures aren't the things we accumulate or the achievements we rack up, but the moments when we're able to make a real difference in someone else's life, when we're able to offer hope to someone who's lost their way, when we're able to love someone back from the edge of despair. Lucky taught me that love always shows up, but he also taught me that love looks for opportunities to show up again and again and again. Once you've been someone's lucky, once you've experienced the profound joy and purpose that comes from helping another human being heal and hope and thrive, you start looking for more opportunities to love, more chances to show up, more ways to wag your metaphorical tail with enthusiasm for others' existence. And the night I almost gave up became the night I learned to give of myself in ways I'd never imagined. The moment when I felt most alone became the foundation for a lifetime of connection and service and love. The dog who appeared out of nowhere on a rainy bridge became the teacher who showed me how to live with purpose and meaning and hope. And that's the final lesson I want to leave you with today. It's never too late to become someone's lucky. It's never too late to learn how to love without conditions, to show up without expectations, to offer hope to those who have lost their way. Whether you're 45 or 65 or 85, you have the capacity to make a difference in someone's life, to be the intervention that saves them, to remind them that they matter and that their story isn't over yet. And the world is full of bridges where people stand alone in the dark, but the world is also full of potential Luckies, ready to show up with love and hope and the simple reminder that no one has to face their dark nights alone. Will you be someone's lucky today? Will you wag your metaphorical tail with enthusiasm for someone's existence? Will you show up with the kind of love that literally saves lives? I hope so. The world needs you. More than you know, more than you can imagine. Someone out there needs exactly what you have to offer. Your presence, your care, your willingness to love them back from the edge of whatever bridge they're standing on. Lucky would be so proud to know that his legacy continues, that his message of unconditional love and hope is still spreading, still saving lives, still reminding people that love always shows up when we need it most. And sometimes, just sometimes, love shows up with 4 legs and a wagging tail and a heart so full of joy that it can't help but overflow onto everyone it meets. I just thank you for listening. My dear friends, care of yourselves, and more importantly, take care of each other. The world is better with you in it, And someone out there needs you to help them remember that their world is better with them in it too. Till next time, keep wagging your metaphorical tails, keep showing up with love, and keep remembering that every day offers new opportunities to be someone's lucky, someone's hope, someone's reminder that no matter how dark the night gets, dawn always comes. And when it does, well, it often comes with a wet nose, a wagging tail, and a heart full of love that reminds us why life is worth living after all.